Headphones on. Lights out. 16 true stories told in the rain. You don't have to stay awake for this one. Volume 2. I spent 41 years appraising other people's regrets in Marrow behind a counter that smelled like machine oil and old velvet. You learn things in a job like that. You learn a wedding ring tells you more about a marriage than the couple ever will. The ring came in on a Tuesday, carried by a volunteer firefighter named Bram Osgood, still smelling like a house that had burned 2 nights before. He said the Wren place on the East End went up fast, and this was the only thing worth pulling from the ash. 14-karat gold, a thin band, the kind you buy when you're young and broke and certain. The odd part was the ring itself. A house fire hot enough to take a roof down should have scorched that band black, dulled the shine at least. But it came out of the ash bright as the day it was bought, like the fire had gone around it on purpose. In this town, everyone knows something they don't say out loud. That's not a saying, it's a fact of how Marrow runs. So when Bram set that ring down and wouldn't look at it twice, I should have paid more attention than I did. I logged it the way I logged everything: weight, carat, condition, in the same green ledger I'd used since Otto Vance and I opened the shop together. Halsey and Vance Pawn and Loan, the sign still says, even though Otto's been gone 11 years. I set the ring in the display case under the counter light and went home. The next morning it was warm, not room warm. Warm like a coal that hadn't finished dying. I told myself the case sat near the heater vent, and that was that, because a man my age doesn't go looking for reasons to lie awake. Old Merle Doss came in for his usual browse and wouldn't stand near that case. Said his wife's family knew the Wrens, said there was history there nobody talked about at the diner. I asked what history. He just bought a fishing lure and left faster than a man his age should move. After Merle left, the shop held a smell I couldn't place, something like a struck match gone out too soon, sweet and metallic under the machine oil. I checked the wiring, checked the heater vent, found nothing burning, and told myself old buildings carry old smells that surface without reason. 3 days later, I noticed the scratches, thin hairline, inside the band where no scratch should form from wear alone. I told myself it was tarnish, cheap plating flaking under the light, and I got out my polishing cloth to prove it to myself. The polish didn't remove the marks. It brought them up clearer. Letters, not scratches. Tobias Wren, spelled out small as a whisper along the inside curve in handwriting I didn't recognize and couldn't explain. I looked it up. Tobias Wren, the man whose house had burned, was already dead by then. A ladder accident at a job site 2 towns over, 4 days after the fire. Coincidence, I told myself. Men fall off ladders. It happens without any ring being involved. I checked the obituary twice because something about it sat wrong. The paper said Tobias fell from a ladder on a clear afternoon. No wind, no rain. Nothing to explain a careful man losing his footing on a job he'd done 100 times before. But I kept polishing because that's the kind of curiosity that gets old men in trouble. Under the first name, fainter, a second one surfaced, Marguerite Finn, Tobias's cousin. I learned from the county obituaries, dead of a stroke 6 weeks after the fire, at 43, with no history of it in her family at all. I called Bram Osgood and asked him straight out what he knew about that ring. He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. He said, "Some things in Marrow you don't dig at, Edwin. You just let them pass through your hands and move on." Then he hung up before I could ask him what he meant by passing through. That night I brought the ring to my workbench instead of the case. Under a stronger lamp, with a loop pressed close, I found a third layer beneath the gold plating. Older, deeper, worn almost smooth by decades of hands. And when the light caught it right, I read a name I already knew by heart. Otto Vance, my old partner, dead of a sudden heart attack at 59. No warning, no history. 1 year almost to the day after he'd appraised a ring just like this one, for a customer he never named to me. I sat with that a long time before I understood what I was actually looking at. This wasn't a curse riding along with bad luck. It was a ledger, the same as the one in my own drawer, except this one belonged to the whole town. Somebody, generations back, decided debts don't vanish just because the person who owes them dies. They get passed. This ring is how Marrow keeps score. I went down to the county records that week, telling myself I only wanted dates straight from my own ledger. What I found instead were 6 names across 3 decades, each one dying quiet and sudden within a year of a ring passing through my counter. Every ring sold by me or by Otto before me. I tried to talk myself out of it the way I'd tried before. Static electricity explains a warm band. Cheap plating explains scratches. Grief explains why an old man sees his dead partner's name in worn gold under bad light. None of it held anymore, and I knew it wouldn't hold the moment someone new put that ring on their finger. I should have thrown it in the river. I told myself I would, and then I thought about my granddaughter Wren's wedding in the spring and what a ring like this, sold clean with a good story, could fetch from the right buyer. I am not proud of how fast that thought crowded out the fear. Petra Lindqvist walked in on a Thursday, new to town, engaged to a man named Callum Doyle, who worked the new plant off the county line. She didn't know Marrow yet, didn't know its habit of looking away from certain shelves. She saw the ring and asked to try it on before I'd even opened the case fully. Her hand was warm when she reached for the tray, ordinary warm, a young woman's hand, and that should have settled me more than it did. Instead, I found myself watching her fingers, the way you'd watch a stove burner you weren't sure was off. I told her, lightly, that the ring had history. She laughed and said every ring does. I almost told her the truth, standing right there with my hand on the glass, and then I thought of Wren's wedding fund, and I said nothing at all. The ring didn't want to leave the tray. I felt it catch, the way old metal sometimes does against velvet, except this wasn't old metal being stubborn. It was cold one second and hot the next, and the case glass fogged where my breath hadn't reached it. Dry air, I told her. Static from the carpet. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong, just slid the band onto her finger and turned her hand toward the window light, admiring it. And that's when I saw the first hairline mark forming under her knuckle, right there while I watched. I told her to take it off. She thought I was joking about the price, laughed again, said, "I already love it, Mr. Halsey." Then she paid in cash, thanked me, and walked out into the evening with Callum's name already half formed in her mouth about the surprise she'd give him. I stood at the window and watched them walk toward Callum's truck, her hand lifted to catch the last of the light on that band. For 1 second, just before they turned the corner, the gold looked less like it was catching the sun and more like it was giving light back on its own. I stood alone in the shop for a long while, and then I went to my own ledger, the ordinary one, the one where I'd logged the ring's weight and carat on the day it came in. There was a new line under my entry, in ink I hadn't put there, in handwriting that made the back of my neck go cold before my eyes had even finished reading it. It wasn't Petra's name. It was Wren's, my granddaughter, 26 years old, 3 months from her own wedding, written in full, where no one had been standing to write it. I understood then what the debt actually was, and whose hand had truly sold that ring. I called her twice. No answer either time. I sat there with the receiver against my ear, listening to it ring into an empty house, thinking about every ring, every watch, every scratched locket I'd ever priced high because I wanted the money more than I wanted to ask who it had really belonged to. I keep coming back to the shape of those letters in my ledger. The loops on the W, the slant on the N. I've written 1,000 names on pawn slips over 41 years. And I know my own hand when I see it, even when I never held the pen. Story 2. My name is Nora Petrakis, and for 6 years I have sold and renewed commercial insurance policies for small towns nobody's heard of. Millbrook hired my firm to update every shop's coverage before its centennial parade. 41 businesses in 5 days. It sounded like the easiest week of my year. I checked into the Larson Inn on Monday morning with a rolling case full of forms and a town map somebody had hand-drawn for me at the front desk. Millbrook looked exactly like the postcard version of itself. Brick storefronts, a centennial banner strung across the square, a bandstand somebody had already started decorating. Ossian Pruitt at the hardware store was the first stop, and he was lovely, a little slow with paperwork, but lovely. Nothing about that first hour felt wrong. The second stop was Idalia Fenwick's bakery. I asked her, just to make conversation, how long her family had run the place. She smiled and said, word for word, "Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family." I wrote it down as a nice quote for my report. I didn't think about it again until an hour later. Thaddeus Ray ran the butcher shop 3 doors down. I asked him a completely different question about his refrigeration equipment, and somewhere in his answer, he said it too. Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family. Same rhythm, same pause before the word fire. I told myself it was a town slogan, something everyone learned for tourists. I started noticing the clocks. Every shop I'd visited that morning, hardware store, bakery, butcher, kept a clock behind the register, and every one of them was stopped at 4:17. Not close to 4:17, exactly. I told myself it was some town tradition tied to the fire, a shared moment of silence turned permanent decoration, and I wrote that down as a nice detail for my report too. It wasn't until I checked my own watch against the bandstand clock in the square, also frozen at 4:17, that the coincidence stopped feeling like decoration. By the 4th shop, I stopped believing that. Odalys Krantz, at the dress shop on the corner, said it a 3rd time, unprompted, in response to a question about her lease dates. Not similar, identical. Every consonant landing in the same place, like a recording playing under her voice. That night I called my supervisor in Albany and told him it sounded like one of those small-town horror stories people email into late-night radio shows. He laughed. I laughed too, and then I lay in bed at the Larson Inn and couldn't remember what was funny about it. In the morning I tried the rational version out loud, on myself, in the mirror, the way you rehearse a lie to see if it holds its shape. Small towns repeat themselves, I said. Tourist towns train their staff on scripts, I said. Then I remembered that the dress shop's granddaughter, maybe 9 years old, sitting behind the counter with a coloring book, had looked up at me the day before and said the line too, in the exact same cadence, before I'd asked her anything at all. The next morning I pulled the ownership histories from every file I had. Pruitt said the hardware store passed to him in 1962. Fenwick's said 1958. Ray's said 1971. But every single one of the previous owners, all the way back, stopped existing on paper in the exact same year, 1924. Then the names simply started again. I told myself it was a clerical quirk, some fire in the county courthouse that wiped early records and forced everyone to refile at once. Small towns lose paperwork. That was the rational version, and I liked it enough to keep working. I liked it right up until I asked Sylvan Hutt, the barber, why 1924 kept coming up. He didn't answer my question. He gave me the line instead, unasked, staring at a spot just past my shoulder. Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family. Then he smiled like he'd answered me perfectly and went back to sweeping hair off the floor. There was a smell in Sylvan Hutt's shop that I hadn't noticed until he said the line. Something like a struck match held just a little too long, sweet and black at the edges. It wasn't cigarette smoke, and it wasn't the aftershave lined up on his counter. It came and went the way a draft comes and goes, except the door hadn't opened, and the window behind him was sealed shut with old paint. That night, the humming came up through the floorboards of my room at the inn, low, patient, like a refrigerator 2 rooms over. I told myself it was the boiler. I didn't check. Wednesday morning, I caught the mistake. Thaddeus Ray signed my receipt copy the way he'd signed every other form all week, except this time, his hand slipped past his own name and wrote a different one entirely. Alder. Not Ray. Alder. I pointed it out, gently, the way you correct anyone's typo. He looked at the page. He looked at me. He didn't correct it. He didn't blink. He simply stopped talking, mid-sentence. and stood there so still I checked to see if he was breathing. Thursday morning, the butcher shop was open on schedule. A different man stood behind the counter in Ray's apron, with Ray's name still stitched above the pocket. When I asked where Mr. Ray was, he smiled the same smile and said the line, "Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family." Nobody in that shop acted like anything had changed, because as far as Millbrook was concerned, nothing had. I asked the new man his own name, just to have something to write down. He said Ray, without hesitating, in the same voice, and when I glanced at the receipt book behind the counter, the signature line for that morning already had Ray's looping W filled in, hours before he could have written it himself. I didn't ask a second question. I don't think I wanted the answer to have time to arrive. I went to the town hall that afternoon looking for a fire report from 1924, thinking a real disaster might explain the paperwork gap. The clerk sent me to the archive room in the basement under the square itself and told me to take my time. I wish she hadn't said it that way. The clerk didn't follow me down. She stood at the top of the stairs, keys still in hand, and told me the light down there sometimes flickered before it caught, so I shouldn't worry if it took a moment. It took several moments. In that dark, I heard something that might have been pipes settling or might have been 41 voices exhaling at once, and I decided, standing there, that some questions were better left as sounds instead of words. The archive smelled like wet stone and old glue, rows of leather ledgers, unlabeled, and at the far end, set into the floor, an iron grate breathing thin mist up into the bulb light. I found the fire ledger from 1924 on the third shelf. It didn't describe a fire that burned buildings. It described a fire that burned people and a debt the survivors made to keep the rest of the town standing. The ledger named the original merchants who died that night, and beneath each name, a list of everyone who has worn that name since, decade after decade, shop after shop: Prewitt, Fenwick, Ray, Krantz, Hutt, Alder. 41 names, rotating, kept alive on paper and behind counters, because whatever took the original merchants only agreed to stay quiet, as long as their storefronts never went dark and their names never lapsed. I read the list of names 3 times before I let myself understand what I was looking at, because some of the handwriting in that ledger matched receipts I'd collected that same week. Ink too fresh for a page that old. My own hand had started shaking hard enough that the mist from the grate seemed to be breathing in time with it, rising and falling, patient, the way the humming under my floorboards had been patient 2 nights before. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded note in handwriting that wasn't the clerk's. It was signed R. Castellan, dated 30 years earlier, another insurance agent who'd sat where I was sitting. The note said only 3 words: "Do not correct them." I ran up out of that basement faster than I've run from anything in my life. Every shop on Main Street had its door standing open when I hit the square. Every shopkeeper standing in their frame, watching me without moving. And all of them, all 41 of them, said the line at once, in perfect unison, loud enough to fill the whole street. "Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family." I got to my car. I don't remember the drive out on the old post road, only the moment the Millbrook water tower disappeared behind me in the mirror. I told myself I'd never take another assignment in a town that small again. I meant it for a while. 3 weeks later, back in Albany, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a policy renewal notice, my firm's letterhead, my own signature scanned onto the bottom line, for a dress shop on the corner of Main and the Square. Millbrook. The listed owner's name was mine. The coverage start date read 1924. At the bottom, under the effective date, someone had already filled in the rehearsed answer to a question I never asked. Since the fire took the old square, this shop's been in the family. I have not been back to Millbrook. I don't think it matters anymore whether I go. Story 3. My name's Milo Hendricks. I'm 16, and I deliver pizza for Callahan's on Route 58 in Harlow Falls, population 2,000 and shrinking. Everyone in this town knows the rule about the last house before the county line. You don't deliver there after dark. You don't even slow down. Nobody explains why. They just say it the way you'd warn a kid about a hot stove. Callahan's a decent boss, pays cash under the table, keeps the ovens running past midnight for the truckers coming off 58. He's the one who first told me about the Marrow place, out past the last working streetlight, the house with the porch that never gets fixed. He said an old woman named Edith Marlowe lives there alone, has for as long as anyone remembers, and that she orders a plain cheese pizza maybe twice a year. He said whoever takes that delivery gets a $5 bonus and a 2-word instruction: don't linger. I asked Callahan once why the bonus was exactly $5, not 10, not 20. He shrugged and said that was just always the number, going back before he owned the place, back to the man who owned it before him. Nobody had ever raised it, not even for inflation, like the amount itself mattered more than the money. On a Friday in October, the order came in at 11:40 p.m. Plain cheese, extra crispy, cash on delivery, last house on 58. Callahan looked at the ticket, looked at me, and didn't say anything, which was somehow worse than if he had. The last mile of Route 58 has no other houses, no mailboxes, just fence posts leaning into dead cornfields. My headlights caught the Marrow place before I expected it, a single porch light burning yellow, though Callahan swore the power out there had been cut off for years. I told myself it had to be a generator, some old rig humming away under the porch boards that Callahan didn't know about. But there was no engine sound, no exhaust smell. Nothing but that steady yellow glow and the crickets going dead silent the closer I got to it. I parked in the gravel and noticed the shadow first, before I even noticed the door. It felt wrong. Too long for a bulb that dim, stretching off the porch and across the yard like it belonged to something twice her height. Edith Marlowe opened the door before I knocked. She was small, stooped, wearing a cardigan the color of old newspaper, and she smiled at me like she'd been expecting exactly this face at exactly this hour for a long time. She said, "You'll do," before I even handed her the box. Then she said something quieter, something I didn't catch, and touched 2 fingers to my sleeve like she was checking I was solid. I got my money, my $5 bonus, and I left fast, the way you're supposed to. In my mirror, her porch light shrank down to a pinprick, but the shadow on her lawn didn't shrink with it. For half a second, it looked like it turned to watch me go. I glanced at the dashboard clock without thinking, and it read 11:38, 2 minutes before I'd even left Callahan's that night. I tapped the glass, sure it was stuck, and it jumped forward to the correct time so fast I almost believed I'd imagined the first number. I told myself it was the angle of my headlights, some trick of dead grass and bad wiring. I drove home to Larch Street, doing 60 on a 40 road, and I didn't look in the mirror again until my own driveway. Nothing followed me that night. I checked. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 full minutes with the engine off, just watching the empty street, and eventually I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Monday morning, I got to first period 2 minutes late, and my friend Dustin Ellery said, "Where were you? Your shadow's been sitting in your seat since before the bell." I laughed. Everyone laughed. Then I looked at the empty desk beside the window and the light coming through it, and something about the angle made my stomach drop. It happened again Tuesday. Wednesday, a substitute teacher asked me to stop standing in the doorway before I'd even walked through it. She said she'd seen me arrive twice. I started checking clocks obsessively, comparing them. Sure, one of us was lying. I compared my phone, my watch, the classroom clock, and the one in the hallway, certain one of them had to be broken. They all agreed with each other. They just didn't agree with whatever the substitute and Dustin had seen standing in doorways I hadn't reached yet. By Thursday, I stopped laughing it off. My little sister Tilly asked me at dinner why I'd been standing at the top of the stairs an hour before I actually got home from practice. My mother hadn't seen anything, but Tilly had, and Tilly doesn't make things up. I went to the Harlow Falls Library on Saturday and pulled every clipping I could find on Route 58. Most of it was nothing. Grain prices, a bridge closure in 1987. But one brittle page from the County Gazette mentioned 4 houses built at the town's original boundary lines. Each one, the article said, kept by a caretaker family until the line needed a new keeper. The Marrow house was the last one still standing. The article didn't explain what a keeper actually did. It just said the position was never advertised, never elected. It was simply handed to whoever crossed the threshold when the old keeper could no longer hold it. I found one more line, half torn away at the fold, about the original keepers never aging the way their neighbors did, staying strangely upright and clear-eyed decades past when they should have gone frail. The paper didn't call that a blessing. It just listed it, flat, between the price of feed corn and a notice about the church roof. I remembered her fingers on my sleeve. I remembered her saying, "You'll do," like she was checking a form off a list. I drove back out to Route 58 that same afternoon, in daylight, telling myself I was going to demand an explanation. The porch light was dead. The windows were dark and the door was unlocked. And when I stepped inside, calling her name, the house was empty in the specific way a house gets when someone has been gone a very long time, not a few days. On the kitchen table sat a single pizza box, my box, folded flat and dry as paper, though I'd handed it to her warm 8 days before. Under it was a photograph of a much younger Edith standing on that same porch, and behind her, stretching across the yard, a shadow that didn't match her pose at all. I asked Callahan about her the next shift, casually, like I hadn't spent a week losing sleep. He wouldn't look up from the register. He said, "Everybody in this town knows something about that house, kid. We just don't say it out loud because saying it makes it yours." That night, my shadow wasn't at school waiting for me. It was standing at the edge of my own bedroom, between the bed and the door, when I finally understood what it had actually been doing every one of those mornings. It hadn't been getting ahead of me. It had been making sure there was nowhere left for me to go that it hadn't already claimed first. I packed a bag that weekend anyway. I told my mother I was staying at Dustin's, and I drove west on Route 58 as fast as the old sedan would go, past the Marrow house, past the dead cornfields toward the county line and whatever was on the other side of it. At the exact spot where the fence posts stop, and the road sign says, "You are now leaving Harlow Falls," my headlights just went out. Not the battery, not the bulbs. The lights simply stopped reaching past the front of my hood, like the dark past that sign belonged to something older than electricity. I sat there a long time before I turned the car around. In my mirror, my own shadow was already stretched across the back seat, patient, unbothered. Exactly the shape of something that has done this before, and will do it again. For as long as somebody has to stand at the edge of this town and keep the line from moving. I drive Route 58 every night now. Plain cheese pizzas mostly, sometimes nothing at all. Just checking the boundary the way Edith must have checked it for 60 years before me. Last week I trained the new delivery kid, showed him which house to avoid after dark, and I watched his shadow fall wrong on the porch before he'd even touched the door, because somewhere out past the county line, on some other road nobody talks about, there's already a fourth keeper waiting for their own replacement to knock. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Marlene from Kansas. She says she's told this story out loud exactly twice in her life, and both times she stopped partway through. She's asking us to finish it for her. She grew up in a town called Sparrow Bend, population maybe 900, the kind of small town where everyone knows something about everyone else and nobody says what. Every August they held the Belhaven County Fair in the field behind the grain co-op. Same string lights, same Ferris wheel that only ran 4 hours a night because the generator got hot. The summer she's writing about, she was 13. Her brother Emmett was 10. There was a raffle booth run by an older woman named Mrs. Fisk, quarter a ticket. Prize was a wooden box wrapped in burlap that nobody, not even Mrs. Fisk, would say what was inside. The box itself felt wrong in her hands before it was even hers to hold. Mrs. Fisk let her lift it once, just to gauge the raffle's worth, and it weighed almost nothing, like the burlap wrapped around air. But when Marlene shook it, very gently, something inside shifted with a sound like wet gravel settling, heavier than the box had any right to sound. Marlene remembers standing at that booth and noticing the tickets in the bin, dozens of them, all with her brother's name, written in different handwriting, like half the town had filled one out for him without telling anyone else they'd done it. She asked her mother about it that night. Her mother said, "Maybe folks just like your brother," but she said it looking at the stove, not at Marlene, and her voice had the flat sound of a sentence she'd practiced. She almost let her mother's answer stand. Then she remembered the tickets weren't just numerous. They were identical in the way people's handwriting isn't supposed to be, letter for letter, like each person had copied Emmett's name from the same original slip instead of writing it themselves. When she brought that up, her mother turned off the stove burner, though nothing had been cooking on it. When they called his name at the drawing, nobody in that tent looked surprised. They looked relieved, like a held breath finally let go. Marlene remembers clapping and feeling like she was the only one in the room who didn't understand the joke. She looked around the tent for someone, anyone, who might share the relief on their faces, and instead caught Mrs. Fisk watching not Emmett but her, Marlene, with an expression she didn't understand until years later. The look of someone checking a spare part was still in place. Nobody at the fair met her eyes after that. The Ferris wheel kept turning behind them, 4 hours a night, same as always, and she remembers thinking it looked slower than it should. Their aunt carried the box home wrapped in a feed sack and told them the old fair custom, don't open it for 7 days, let it settle. Marlene had never heard of that rule before that summer and never heard it again after. Those 7 days, Emmett started humming a tune she'd never heard on the radio. He'd wake up standing at the back window, facing the tree line behind the co-op, and not remember getting up. She tried recording the tune on her uncle's tape player once, just to have proof it existed outside her own head. But every time she played the recording back, there was nothing on it, only the hiss of the room, and, once, what might have been her own breathing slowed down to match the missing melody. She told herself the tape deck was old. She kept the tape anyway, and never played it again. On the 5th day, she went looking for the fair's little printed rulebook, just to find the word for that 7-day custom. She found it, buried in fine print near the back, the carrying, no definition, no explanation, just those 2 words printed the same year after year. She asked the fair's printer, a man 3 towns over who'd inherited the plates from his father, why that phrase sat alone with no definition when everything else in the booklet was explained down to the raffle odds. He said the plate for that page had never changed since his grandfather said it, not one letter, and that he'd asked his father the same question once and been told some pages print themselves whether you ask them to or not. She wanted to think it was nothing, a local phrase, a leftover joke from some harvest tradition. She kept telling herself that until she found the ledger in her uncle's feed shed 3 years later, after her uncle passed and she went through his things. It was a list. 1 name per line, 1 line per generation, going back to 1890-something. Every name a child, always around 10 years old, always chosen the same August every 20-some years. Her brother's name was the last one written. Under his name, in the same handwriting from the same pen, was a second line, her own name, written smaller, marked as backup in case he refused. She held the ledger page up to the window, checking the ink, and it was true the pen matched. Same faded blue-black, same slight drag on the downstroke, but the pressure under her own name was lighter, almost hesitant, as if whoever wrote it hadn't been sure yet that it would need to be read. On the 7th night, back when she was 13, Emmett opened the box alone in his room while she watched from the hallway. She never saw what was inside. She only remembers the smell that came out of it. Cold dirt, like a cellar that had never seen daylight, and the way his face went still, like something had been quietly returned to its rightful shape. He was never cruel after that, never strange in any way you could point to at a dinner table. He just stopped being fully home. He'd answer a question a half-second late, like he was translating it first. Their mother stopped asking him things that mattered. On his 18th birthday, he packed 1 bag, told their mother it was his turn to carry, and walked out toward the tree line behind the co-op. The town didn't call the sheriff. Nobody filed a report. Mrs. Fisk brought over a casserole 2 days later like somebody had died of natural causes. Marlene found Mr. Pratt, who'd run the fair board for 40 years, and asked him straight out what the raffle really was. He didn't deny it. He said every town owes something to whatever's out past its fences, and every generation, one child gets picked to carry the payment out. He said the rest of them get to stay soft, get to stay safe. Somebody has to be the one who isn't. Marlene moved away from Sparrow Bend at 22 and swore she'd never think about that box again. She has a son now, 9 years old. Last week, cleaning out a closet, she found a roll of raffle tickets tucked in an old feed sack, already printed with his name, in handwriting she doesn't recognize, and dated for a county fair 3 towns over that she has never once heard of before. My name is Juniper Cade, and on the night of October the 14th, I was 22 years old and 6 weeks into my first season as a seasonal ranger at Hearthstone National Park. It was my first solo night patrol. I had a Stanley thermos of gas station coffee, a Chevy pickup with 110,000 miles on it, and a call sign nobody but me had ever used, Unit 12. The training video said the woods at night would sound like wind and nothing else, and for the first 2 hours they were right. I logged mile markers, checked 2 empty campsites, and radioed my position every 30 minutes like I'd been taught. The forest smelled like wet bark and diesel. Nothing about that first stretch of the night suggested it would be the last ordinary one I'd have. The wind had a rhythm to it that night, 3 beats and a pause, like breathing. I noticed it around mile marker 9 and told myself, weather did that sometimes, funneling through the canyon walls the way it always had on cold nights. By mile marker 11, the pause had gotten longer, like whatever was breathing had started holding it on purpose, waiting to see if I'd notice. At 11:47 p.m., my radio caught a transmission that wasn't on any channel I'd been assigned. A woman's voice, thin under static, said she was hurt near the Widow's Comb trailhead and needed help right away. I knew the name because every seasonal gets warned about it in orientation. That trailhead had been closed for 30 years, gated and struck from every current map. I told myself the call had crossed wires from a search and rescue drill 2 counties over, the kind of interference Odell warned us about in training. But drills don't know trailhead names that were struck from the map before I was born. And they don't whisper the word please twice, low and wet, like the caller had already stopped breathing between one plea and the next. I pulled the paper trail log from the glove box, the one we still keep for dead zones where GPS drops. There was no active order for that trailhead, no ranger assigned, no reason for anyone to be there. But the coordinates the voice gave were exact, down to the 4th decimal. The kind of precision you only get from a device already sitting inside the closed perimeter. I checked the coordinates against the topo map bolted inside the truck door, tracing the pin with my finger until I found it. 300 yards past where the trailhead should have ended, out past the old fire road that had been swallowed by growth since 1994. No trail runs that far. There never has. Not on any map the department has ever printed, not even the ones filed before the closure. I called it into the station to confirm before responding. Odell, who'd been running the night desk since before I was born, told me flatly there was no call logged on his end, no unit requesting backup, nothing on record for that trailhead since it was decommissioned. He said, "There's nobody assigned out there, Juniper. There hasn't been in 30 years. Protocol says you respond to any distress call regardless of jurisdiction, so I drove out anyway, telling myself it was equipment bleed through, an old frequency looping on a dead channel. That explanation held for about 4 miles. Then the voice came through a second time, and this time it used my full name, Juniper Marlowe Cade, a middle name only my mother has ever said out loud. My hands went cold on the wheel before my mind caught up to why. The kind of cold that starts in the fingertips and climbs. The heater was running fine. I checked twice, but the air inside the cab had gone thin and metallic, like the inside of an old bell that had just stopped ringing. The gate at Widow's Comb was exactly the way the old maps described it. Chain-link fencing, rusted amber, a padlocked chain looped through the post, except the chain wasn't rusted through where it mattered. It had been cut clean, recently, the bright raw metal still catching my flashlight like it had been done that same night. I told myself a hiker had cut it, some off-book thrill-seeker chasing the trailhead's old reputation, but there were no boot prints in the mud on either side of the gate. Not mine yet, not anyone's, only a smear low against the post like something had been dragged through instead of walked. I stepped past the gate onto ground that hadn't had an official boot on it in 3 decades. The air changed almost immediately, colder and stiller, like walking into a room where someone had just stopped talking. I told myself the cold pocket was elevation. I didn't believe it even as I said it. Something about the quiet felt curated, like the woods had been arranged rather than simply present. No owl calls, no rustle of something small moving through brush, not even the tick of my own footsteps against packed dirt. I stopped once to listen and heard my own breathing repeated back to me, a half second behind, like an echo that hadn't learned the trick of catching up. The trailhead kiosk was still standing, its glass case shattered, and inside it, impossibly dry for something left outdoors 30 years, sat an old reel-to-reel recorder with its wheels turning. No cord ran to it, no battery compartment I could find. It was simply running, the tape hissing softly, the way it had apparently been running the entire time. I crouched and put my palm flat against the kiosk's wood, expecting damp rot under 30 years of weather. It was warm instead. Faintly, the way a chest is warm right after someone stops breathing against it. I pulled my hand back before I understood why I needed to, and the tape kept turning like it hadn't noticed I'd touched it at all. I pressed my ear close and understood what I was hearing wasn't one recording. It was dozens, stacked on top of each other, each new voice recorded directly over the last responder's words, so that every ranger who'd ever answered this call had become part of the next one. Somewhere buried under 30 years of static was the very first voice that had ever said help. I counted the layers by ear, the way you count rings in a tree, and lost track somewhere past 40. Each voice had the same cadence at the start. Help, please, I'm hurt. Before the next voice swallowed it whole. None of them ever finished a sentence, not one. And under that first voice, faint but unmistakable, I heard my own coordinates being read back to me. Not the ones I'd written down at the gate, but the exact numbers my radio was broadcasting at that second, updating live, as if something on that tape was still listening to me right then. I keyed my radio to call it in and report the recorder, and before I finished my sentence, the radio answered back in my own voice, finishing it for me a half second before I'd actually said the words. I hadn't spoken yet. It had. For one full second, neither of us said anything. My own voice and me, both of us waiting to see which one would speak next. The forest had gone silent in a way it hadn't all night. No wind, no insects, like something out past the kiosk light had leaned in to listen too. I ran. I don't remember the boardwalk under me, only the gate, only the chain I didn't bother relatching, only the truck door slamming and the engine catching on the second try instead of the first, the way it always does in cold weather, an ordinary detail that felt like the only ordinary thing left in the world. Back at the station, I told Odell everything, and to his credit, he didn't call me hysterical. He pulled the personnel files instead. In 1994, a ranger named Del Faraday had gone out to that same trailhead after an identical unlogged distress call, and he was never found. His file photo still hangs in the equipment shed. Nobody had thought to ask why. 3 weeks later, I trained the new seasonal hire on night radio procedure, same as Odell trained me. I told her about false frequencies, dead channels, equipment bleed through, every rational thing I'd once believed. I did not tell her about Widow's Comb, because the file on it had already been quietly removed from the cabinet before her orientation. 2 nights ago, her radio picked up a woman asking for help near a trailhead that's been closed for 30 years. She said the voice knew her name before she'd introduced herself. She said it also knew mine. Thin, buried under the static, folded in with all the others, reading my coordinates from that night like it was still keeping them warm for whoever answers next. Story 2. My name is Wendell Corby, and I have 20 years on the trail crews and night patrols of Sable Creek National Park. 3 weeks from my retirement, and my supervisor still had me running the fire road gates alone after dark. I did not mind it. 20 years, you get used to the quiet, and the quiet gets used to you. That night I was closing the old logging gates along Forest Road 212, the ones the park stopped maintaining back in the 90s. 11th rule, we call it. Every gate locked by 11 or the district office writes you up. I had 4 gates left when my headlights caught them standing at the edge of the tree line. A woman, a man, 2 kids, no packs, no headlamps, no phone lit up between them the way every lost hiker holds one like a torch. The woman said her name was Marta Palliser, and that they had gotten separated from a trail group hours before. Her husband, Innes, kept a flashlight in his hand that flickered even though I could hear the batteries were fresh. I looked again at Innes's flashlight, the way it stuttered light across the gravel, and told myself it was a loose bulb filament, nothing more. But the beam never dimmed and brightened the way a bad connection does. It just cut, clean and total, like something was closing a hand over it and letting go. I have seen 100 dying flashlights in 20 years on this road. I had never seen one do that. I told them the gates lock automatic past 11, and the walk out was under 2 miles if we moved. The little girl, Sella, looked up at me and said, "We have been walking a long time." I remember thinking that was an odd way for a 7-year-old to put it. Not tired, just a long time. The boy, Wick, his shoes were soaked through to the laces. The ground under us was bone dry, hadn't rained in 11 days. I'd written it in my log that morning. I told myself creek crossing somewhere upstream. 20 years teaches you to file the odd thing and keep walking, so that's what I did. I crouched by the boy's shoes anyway, some old habit of checking evidence before you let it go. The water on his laces smelled wrong, faintly, like the inside of a culvert pipe that sat stagnant for years, not creek water at all. I straightened up fast and didn't crouch again the rest of the night. I radioed the station, gave my position at Gate 9, at the 9th marker post coming up on Forest Road 212. Station read it back clean. Corby, copy, gate marker 9er, 1051. Ordinary as coffee. I felt good about it, honestly. 3 weeks left and I was still doing the job right. Marta wore a thin gold necklace, the kind you'd find in a drawer at your grandmother's house. There was a date engraved on the back of the pendant. I only caught it because my flashlight swung across her collar. A year, 1994. I didn't say anything. You don't comment on a stranger's jewelry in the woods at night. I told myself the engraving was probably a birth year, a christening gift, nothing stranger than that. But the metal itself looked wrong under my flashlight. Not tarnished the way old gold tarnishes, but bright, new, like it had been cast that afternoon and stamped with a date 30 years gone. I have handled enough lost and found jewelry at the station to know the difference. This didn't have one. We walked. The family stayed close together, quiet. None of the shivering or complaining you get from cold, wet strangers this deep in a state park at night. Innes never once asked how much farther. That should have told me something. People who are actually lost always ask how much farther. Station called back on the radio, said dispatch, said the desk, had pulled a bulletin matching my description. Family of 4 missing, last seen off Forest Road 212. I laughed and said must be an old file glitch. The voice on the other end paused a half-second too long before agreeing with me. I asked the voice to repeat the bulletin number just to have something solid to write down. There was static, then nothing. Then station came back with a different man's voice entirely, one I didn't recognize from any shift roster I'd worked in 20 years. He read my position back to me before I'd given it. At the second gate, the one I myself had padlocked 2 hours earlier, the chain was hanging open. I checked the lock in my hand. It was the same lock, same scuffed brass, same little dent from where I dropped it in 91. I remember standing there a long moment, doing the math on that, and not liking the answer. I radioed it in as an anomaly, said the second gate had been tampered with. Station told me I'd already called that gate in 10 minutes prior, my own voice on the log. I had hadn't said a word to that radio in 20 minutes. I checked my watch 3 times, like the number might change if I looked hard enough. I was a rookie in '94, my first season, before I knew which trail markers lied and which ones told the truth. There was a search that fall, a family of 4, off this same road, never found. Case went cold before Thanksgiving. I had helped canvass the ridge line for 6 straight days and never once thought about it since. I remembered, standing there, that the search captain in '94 had told us to call out names every 100 yards in case they could hear us and couldn't answer. I had called Wick's name into that dark 100 times that fall and never once gotten anything back. I was getting something back now, and it was walking 8 feet ahead of me wearing his own soaked shoes. Marta's pendant, '94. Wick's name on a missing flyer I had stapled to a bulletin board myself, 20 years and a lifetime ago. I stopped walking. Sela turned around first and smiled at me the way you smile at someone who is finally caught up. After that, the fire road narrowed, the fog thickened low around our ankles, and the family stopped asking me anything at all. They knew which fork to take before my flashlight even found it. I had spent 20 years learning this road. They were walking it like they had never left. The air changed the way it does before a storm that never comes, pressure dropping in my ears until I had to swallow to clear them. I could smell wet stone and something underneath it, sweet and old, like leaves gone to mud years ago and never dried since. None of it matched the dry log I'd written that morning, and I stopped trying to make it match anything at all. I keyed the radio to call for backup and got my own voice back through the static, calm, professional, reading off a checkpoint I hadn't reached yet. Gate 12, all clear, proceeding on foot. I hadn't said those words. Someone ahead of me on this road had. I understood then, slow and cold, the way you understand a fall only after you're already in the air. This family was not being led out of Sable Creek. They were leading me in, one deadbolt at a time, and someone further down that fire road had already logged me past every gate I hadn't reached. I thought about the 6 days I'd spent canvassing that ridge in '94, how the search had ended with nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of cloth, like the family had simply stopped existing between one gate and the next. I understood now they hadn't stopped anywhere. They had just kept walking, patient as the fog, waiting for someone with 20 years of trust in his own logbook to walk back in after them. I told the Pallisers I needed to head back for a vehicle. Marta only tilted her head, patient as a schoolteacher, and said the gate behind us had already locked itself for the night. I turned my flashlight around and she was right. Chain loop tight, padlock closed. No key on my belt would fit a lock I never bought. I ran the last stretch to gate 12 alone, boots skidding on wet leaves that had no business being wet. The family didn't follow. They didn't need to. When I reached the final marker, my radio clicked on by itself and read back my own sign-off, word for word, 3 full minutes before I said it. When they finally found my truck the next morning, still idling at the first gate, my radio log showed a full night of clean checkpoints, all 12 gates locked on schedule. My sign-off time stamped correct to the minute. Nobody at the station could explain why that sign-off was logged 4 hours before my shift ever started. I put in for my retirement the next week, 20 years, and I'd never once questioned who else might be walking those fire roads under my badge number, checking in gates I hadn't reached yet, filed neat under my name, 1 year for everyone I had left to work. Story 3. My name is Verena Sable, and for 31 years I have sat at the same radio desk at Tannehill National Park, District 3, working the graveyard channel so the rangers on night patrol never talk to dead air. My husband, Dean Farrow, worked these woods for 18 years before he disappeared near a stretch called Cutter's Notch. I have not driven past the gate since the search parties gave up 11 months ago. The station smells like the same instant coffee it always has, and the log sheets are the same triplicate carbon paper the Park Service has used since before I got hired. Nothing here changes, which is why I noticed right away when Channel 19, the old relay frequency capped off the week Dean vanished, started clicking on at 3:14 in the morning. Every dispatcher who has worked nights out here keeps her own drawer of park ranger horror stories. Cougar sightings that turn out to be raccoons, radios that pick up truckers, hikers screaming at owls. I used to think mine were ordinary too. This one started small enough that I almost logged it under raccoons. The clock above the transmitter runs 11 seconds behind the one on my desk, has for years. Some quirk of the old wiring nobody bothered to fix. That week it started running 11 seconds ahead instead, then correcting itself the moment I looked away, like it knew I was checking. The first time I heard it, I told myself it was bleed from a trucker CB 2 mountains over. Then I heard the call sign, Pharaoh 6. That was Dean's number, retired the day he went missing, and it should not exist on any working channel in this park. I told myself a lot of things that week. Kids with a scanner, a stray signal off some hunting camp radio. None of it explained why the voice used his exact patrol phrasing, the same clipped way he always signed off. Copy, holding position, out. Our supervisor, Nyla Restrepo, checked the tower logs herself and told me Channel 19 has been physically disconnected at the relay box since the month Dean disappeared. No power runs to it. No way for a signal to originate there. She said it kindly, the way you tell someone their grief is showing. I asked Nyla to walk the relay line herself, just to be thorough, and she did. Boots in the mud, flashlight on every junction box. She came back pale and said the cable was intact and cold to the touch, no current anywhere in it, but that the box itself was warm on the outside, like something had been running through it recently and stopped just before her hand got there. That same week, I found my own field boots in the hall closet, caked in dry red clay, the kind that only sits on the fire roads past the notch. I had not worn those boots since I stopped doing firewatch relief 30 years ago. I told myself I must have moved them while cleaning. Then gas receipts started turning up in my coat pocket, dated for nights I was certain I had fallen asleep in my recliner watching the scanner lights blink. 41 miles round trip, every time. Exactly the distance from my house to the Cutter's Notch relay tower. I did not remember driving anywhere. I started sleeping in my clothes after that, hoping I would wake mid-drive and catch myself in the act. Instead, I woke one morning with the truck engine still ticking down in the driveway, hood warm, and my shoes already off and lined up by the door, laces tucked in the way Dean always tucked his, never the way I do mine. Around the same time, my good lipstick went missing from the bathroom drawer, the shade I have worn for 20 years and never once ran out of. I kept my own private log after that, separate from the station's, just to track the 314 calls. Always the same 3 lines, always 11 seconds of dead air after, like something waiting for a response it never got. One slow Tuesday, I pulled the archive logbooks instead of the current one, wanting proof the channel had really gone quiet the week Dean disappeared. What I found instead was my own handwriting, dated across the last 4 months, signing units in and out under a call sign I had not used since 1994. Sable 2. That was my number back when I still walked fire lookout relief, before I married Dean and moved permanently to the desk. In the log, Sable 2 goes out to the Notch 11 separate nights, always around 3 a.m., and comes back clean a few hours later, no notes on condition. I have not left this building after dark in 11 months. I would know. I called the DMV just to rule something out and asked when my license had last been renewed. The woman on the phone read me a date 4 months old, a signature on file that looked like mine but leaned the wrong way, like someone copying my hand from memory instead of habit. I checked the dates against the mud on my boots and the mileage on the gas receipts, every single one lined up. I sat with that a long time, the coffee going cold in Dean's mug, before letting myself think the only thought that made sense of it. I have been going out there. I just do not remember any of the trips. Whatever this is, it wants a witness who still knows the park roads, and it picked the one dispatcher too grief-stupid to stay off a dead man's frequency. So tonight, at 3:06, 8 minutes before my usual call, I did something I swore I would never do again. I got in the truck. The Notch This road has not been graded since Dean's last patrol, and my headlights caught the same fallen cedar the search teams had to walk around 11 months ago. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had needed to, because apparently I had been driving this road for months without a single scrape on the paint. The relay tower door was already unlocked when I got there, which it should never be, and a kerosene lantern inside was burning low and warm, like it had been lit an hour before I arrived and left for exactly me. The air inside smelled wrong before I even got the door fully open. Wet cedar and kerosene, yes, but under it something sweeter, like the coconut shampoo Dean used and I gave away to the church thrift box the week after the search ended. I stood in the doorway a long moment, breathing it in, telling myself grief plays tricks on the nose the same way it plays tricks on everything else. On the folding table by the transmitter sat a thermos with lipstick on the rim, the exact shade that vanished from my bathroom drawer. Beside it, a pair of field boots in my size, still wet through the laces, standing neatly by the door the way you leave them if you mean to step right back in. The tower's own logbook was open to tonight's date. There was already an entry filled in for 3:14 a.m., 40 minutes ahead of the actual time, ink still wet. It was my handwriting. It said, "Signing in. Pharaoh 6 confirmed active. Proceeding to relay for handoff." The radio on the shelf clicked on by itself. Static. Then that same 11-second silence I had logged 40 times from my desk. Then a voice, using not Dean's call sign this time, but mine. "Sable 2, do you copy?" Spoken so carefully, so familiar, that for one terrible second, I almost answered like nothing was wrong. I understood then what that channel had actually been doing all these months. It was never carrying Dean's voice out of these woods to find me at my desk. It was reaching into my desk and carrying me out here, night after night, and letting me walk myself home again with no memory of the trip, so I would keep answering. I could sign myself out right there and end whatever loop had been running me back and forth across these mountains for 4 months. My hand was already moving toward the pen, the same pen that had written every entry I don't remember making. It felt less like a choice and more like a habit older than my grief. I did not sign the entry. I closed the logbook, blew out the lantern, and drove home the long way, checking my mirrors the whole time for headlights that were not there. My hands did not stop shaking until I was back at my desk with Dean's mug in front of me, cold as always, the clock reading 3:14 exactly, like no time had passed at all. Tonight, when I opened the current logbook to start my shift, tomorrow's date was already filled in below mine, ink not yet dry, time stamped 3:14 a.m., and beside it, for the first time in 11 months, the call sign entered was not Sable 2. It was Pharaoh 6, written in his handwriting, waiting for me to come find him properly this time. It's dated tomorrow, and I haven't left the desk yet. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Rehearsal from Wyoming. She wrote it at 3 in the morning, she says, after 20 years of not writing it. We are reading it word for word, the way she sent it to us. Rehearsal writes, "The box came on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name and my current apartment, which is strange, because I had moved 4 times since the last person who mailed me anything had my old one. The postmark said Kestrel Ridge National Park, Wyoming. My father worked there. He disappeared on a solo night patrol in 1999 when I was 7. Inside was his old uniform jacket, his badge, number 317, and his logbook, the green one he used to let me draw in the back pages of when I was small. I had not seen that logbook in 20 years. The jacket still smelled like cedar smoke and something else underneath, something like a struck match. I pressed my face into the collar without thinking, the way you do with a parent's old clothes, and for 1 second I swore I could smell his aftershave, the same brand my mother threw out in 2001. That was wrong. That jacket had been sealed in a box for 20 years. He was 39 the night he vanished. I turned 39 2 months ago. I did not think about that at the time. I am telling you now so that you think about it now. Most of the entries were boring. Trail conditions, a bear sighting near the ridge, weather notes in his small, slanted handwriting, exactly the way I remembered it from grocery lists on our refrigerator. I told myself a handwriting expert could clear this up in an afternoon, that ink dating was a real science, that someone had simply forged the page well. I even found a forensic document examiner online, bookmarked her site, told myself I'd call in the morning. I never called. Some part of me already understood no lab result would change what the date said. But the last page was not from 1999. The ink was darker, newer, not faded like the rest. The date at the top of the page was last Thursday. I held the page under the kitchen light, tilting it, waiting for the ink to catch a shine the way fresh ink does. It didn't. It drank the light instead, flat and matte, like it had been written with something that wasn't quite ink at all. My hands smelled like pennies for an hour afterward, no matter how many times I washed them. I told myself someone was playing a cruel joke, that another ranger had found the box in storage and added a page for a laugh. I called the park's main office to ask. A man answered, said his name was Ranger Talbot Reyes. When I asked about my father's badge number, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said, Sector 7 is still open for him. We never closed it. Then the line went dead. I called the park office back twice more that night. Both times a recording told me the number was disconnected. The third time at almost midnight, it rang once and picked up into silence. A silence with breathing in it, slow and even, like someone standing very close to a receiver they had no intention of speaking into. I drove out there. 9 hours. I told my husband it was for closure. That part at least was true. I did not tell him about the date on that page. Somewhere around the Nebraska line, the radio started catching a station I couldn't place. A man reading numbers in a flat, patient voice over and over. Badge numbers I realized later, though I didn't know that yet. I changed the station 4 times. It came back 4 times. Same voice, same list. 317, always somewhere near the middle. The gate at Kestrel Ridge was standing open when I arrived, even though the sign said the park closed at dusk. One truck sat in the lot, green and white, older model, plates I didn't recognize. Ranger Reyes was already standing by the door like he'd been waiting exactly that long. Inside, the archive room smelled like cedar and old paper. He walked me to a shelf of logbooks going back decades and pulled mine, the green one, out from between 2 that looked identical. We keep his sector open, he said. Every night, someone signs the sheet. Has for 20 years. I ran my finger along the shelf while he wasn't looking and noticed something I wish I hadn't. Every logbook beside my father's had a name written on its spine in the same slanted hand, and every single date beneath those names fell on someone's 39th year. Some of the books looked older than the park itself. I asked him who signed it. He looked at me like the answer should have been obvious. Him, he said. Every night at 11:40, someone logs in under badge 317. We just never had anyone to give the sign-out sheet to, until now. I opened the logbook to the last page again, the one dated last Thursday. Under the weather notes, in his handwriting, it said, Marisol, if you're reading this, you're the right age now. Meet me at the Ridge Trailhead, Sector 7. Come alone. I asked Reyes if anyone had ever refused to walk the trail. He said once, years ago, a woman had turned around at the gate and driven home. He said the park found her anyway, 3 winters later, sitting in her own car in her own driveway, engine off, hands folded, badge already pinned crooked to her coat. I asked Ranger Reyes how a man missing 20 years could write in a logbook last Thursday. He did not answer. He just held the door open for me, the way you hold a door for someone who's already decided to walk through it. I walked the Ridge Trail at 11:40 because some part of me needed to see the end of a thing that had been left open for 20 years. The trees were exactly like the ones in his old patrol photos. Thin, lodgepole pines with the bark stripped at the same height, like something had been marking them the whole time. The air got colder in patches along the trail, cold in narrow bands like walking through open doorways that weren't there, and each time it happened my flashlight beam bent slightly, the way light bends through water. I stopped counting how many times that happened after the fifth one. I did not stop walking. At the trailhead marker, a flashlight stood upright on the post, switched on, batteries somehow still good after 20 years. Next to it was a fresh page torn from a logbook, folded once, with my name written on the outside. I unfolded it. It said the park never lost him. It said Sector 7 does not close until the ranger who opened it comes back. And the only way back is for someone his exact age, on his exact night, to walk in and take the sign-out sheet from him. It said he was sorry it had to be me. It said he'd been waiting since I was 7, patient, because a man can wait a long time when the waiting has an ending built into it. I don't remember deciding to sign it. I remember the pen was already in my hand. His pen, the one with the chewed cap I used to steal off his desk. I signed my name under badge 317, Sector 7, 11:51 p.m. Ranger Reyes drove me back to my car. He didn't say much. At the gate, he told me the park would send my things along eventually, the way they'd sent my father's. I didn't ask what that meant. I think I already knew. It's been 4 days. This morning, a box arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a green logbook, a badge, number 318, and a note in handwriting that wasn't his, and wasn't mine, but was starting to look like both, asking who's the next name they should wait 40 years for. My name is Dorsey Sanger, and this was my 4th night on the psychiatric floor at Marrow Gate Annex. I clocked in at 10:52 p.m., badge scanning green like always, vending machine humming by the break room the way it had every night that week. Nothing about it felt wrong yet. That is the part I keep coming back to. Nurse Ilsa Finn met me at the station with a clipboard and a look I didn't understand yet. She said I'd been assigned one-on-one observation, room 4, straight through to 7 a.m. I asked what the patient was in for. She said, read the chart, then didn't hand me one. There was no chart, not a missing page, not a smudge. The folder in the slot outside room 4 was empty, the label blank where a name should print. I asked the desk clerk if it was a new admit. She said as far as the system showed, that bed had been unoccupied since March. I checked the little brass plate outside the door itself, the kind bolted on since the building went up in the 70s. It read room 4, same as every chart and every wristband, except the number looked wrong somehow, too thin, the 4 leaning a few degrees off true, like it had been swapped out recently, and nobody bothered matching the font. I told myself old hospitals settle, plates warp, screws loosen. I didn't look at it again after that. The man in room 4 sat upright in a chair by the window, not the bed, hands folded on his knees like he'd been arranged there. Catatonic, they'd call it, if anyone had bothered to write it down. His eyes were open. They didn't track me when I walked in. His wristband had a barcode and a bed number, but the name field was blank, and under admission date it just said pending. I figured car accident, no ID on him, John Doe until someone claimed him. That explanation held for about 6 hours. I actually pulled up the regional accident reports on my phone during break, thinking I could match him to some pileup on the interstate, give him a story that made sense. Nothing. No unidentified male matching his age or description admitted anywhere in the county that week. I decided the records were probably just slow, hospital bureaucracy being what it is. That explanation didn't survive the walk back to his room. Around 1 a.m., his right hand twitched, fingers curling into a loose fist, thumb tucked wrong, like a hand cramping in sleep. I made a note. Involuntary movement, catatonic patient, nothing strange in a psych ward at 1 in the morning. Then, half a second later, without meaning to, I made the exact same fist, same thumb tuck. I actually looked down at my own hand like it belonged to someone else in the room. The room smelled different after that, faintly of pennies, the way your mouth tastes right before you get hurt. I checked the vents, checked the trash can, found nothing that could account for it. It came and went with his breathing, stronger when his hand curled, gone when it relaxed. I told myself I'd mirrored him without noticing, the way you yawn when someone else yawns. Reasonable. Except it happened again at 2:40 and again at 3:15. His hand first, mine after, always the same half-second gap, like I was one beat behind my own body. On my second night with him, I asked Nurse Fenn who he was. She didn't look up from the med cart. She said, "Some rooms don't get names, Dorsey, they get numbers, and you're better off just watching the hands and not asking questions past shift change." I checked the census board myself when she left. 30 beds on East Wing, 30 names listed, 30 check marks. Room 4 wasn't on the board at all, like the room existed, but the ward's own paperwork had agreed to forget it. I went back to the board an hour later just to look again, and the check marks for the other 29 beds had shifted slightly, like someone had erased and redone them in a hurry. Room 4 was still missing, but now there was a faint smudge where a 31st line should have been, as if the board itself was trying to remember something it had been told to forget. Rufus Thibodeau, the night security guard, caught me staring at the board and laughed a little, not unkindly. He said, "Every ward's got a room like that." He said, "You stop asking after your 3rd year here." I asked how long he'd worked nights. He said long enough to know better than me. By my 3rd night alone with him, I noticed something about his face I couldn't place. Not that I recognized him exactly, but that the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyebrows, kept almost resolving into someone I knew. I decided it was fatigue. 12-hour shifts do that to a face. At 3:58 a.m., his hand curled again, but this time the fingers folded around an invisible shape. Thumb pressed to the base of his palm, exactly where I have a scar from a bike accident when I was 9. I hadn't thought about that scar in years. I looked at my own hand. The scar was there, same as always, except now it felt like evidence. I told myself scars are common enough, that plenty of people fold their thumb wrong from some old injury, that I was pattern matching out of exhaustion the way tired minds do. I even tried to recall a time I'd told a coworker about the bike accident, some way he could have known. I came up with nothing. Nobody on that floor had ever seen my hands do anything but chart notes and push a cart. I want to be clear about what I checked next because I checked it twice. I went to the terminal at the nurse's station and pulled up my own employee file to see if maybe I'd filled something out wrong at orientation. My hire date read pending, same word as his admission date. I hadn't noticed that word could apply to a living person until I saw it apply to me. I went back into room 4 because I didn't know what else to do with the feeling climbing up my spine. The fluorescent strip over his bed had started to flicker, on beat with his breathing, and I swear the room felt smaller than it had an hour before. The walls closer, the window further away. I sat down across from him the way you'd sit across from a mirror you didn't trust. His hand twitched a 3rd time that hour, curling into the shape of a pin being held. My exact grip, the one my mother always said looked wrong, thumb too far up the barrel. Half a second later, my own hand did it too, holding a pen I hadn't picked up yet. Somewhere down the hall, a call bell rang once, short, and nobody answered it. Not Fenn, not Thibodeau, not the overhead page system that usually crackled through in under a minute. I counted 11 seconds of silence after it stopped, the kind of silence that has weight to it, like the building was holding still on purpose. I understood, sitting there, that his hand wasn't copying mine. It was moving first. Every single time, his hand moved first, and mine followed. Like his was the original, and mine was the echo, arriving late through some flawed connection I hadn't agreed to. I ran back out to find Nurse Fenn and found the station empty, her cardigan still on the chair, coffee still steaming in the cup. Thibodeau's radio sat on the counter, still clipped to nothing. The clock on the wall read 4:47, and it hadn't moved in what felt like several minutes. When I turned back toward room 4, the door was open, and he was standing in the doorway instead of sitting in the chair. I hadn't heard him get up. His hand was raised, fingers curled around nothing, in the exact shape my hand makes when I'm about to knock on a door I'm nervous to open. I remember thinking very clearly that I still had a choice about whether to answer him, and that the thought itself felt borrowed, already used once by someone standing in my exact spot a half second earlier. My mouth was already moving before I finished deciding anything at all. He knocked twice, softly, on the frame of a door that was already open, and half a second later I heard myself say, "Is anyone there?" in a voice that came out of my mouth but sounded recorded, like it had already been said once before by someone standing exactly where I was standing. I sat down in the chair by the window because my legs stopped agreeing to hold me up, and I understood, too late to matter, that room 4 wasn't where they kept a patient nobody claimed. It was where they kept the version of a person who hadn't finished arriving yet, a rehearsal, running half a second ahead, until the real one caught up completely. The last thing I remember doing on purpose was folding my hands on my knees, thumb tucked wrong against my palm, exactly where the scar is. After that, the room got very quiet, and morning arrived the way it always does on that floor, without asking anyone's permission. The 7 a.m. shift found a nursing assistant sitting upright in the chair of room 4, catatonic, wristband blank where the name should print, admission date pending. Down the hall, at the nurse's station, a young man in a fresh badge was already filling out charts, humming, thumb tucked wrong around his pen. They never did find a chart for the man they moved out of room 4 that morning, but the folder outside the door filled in almost immediately. A new name typed clean across the label, Dorsey Sanger, and under history, someone had already written 4 nights, no incidents. I wasn't there to correct the number. It should have said 5. Story 2. My name is Sylvia Calloway. I am 54 years old, and I have worked the overnight attending shift at Thorncliffe State Hospital for 3 years. Ward 6 is the closed unit, the one visitors never see past the second locked door. At 11 at night, the halls smell like Fisohex and burnt coffee, and 3 nurses run that floor better than anyone I have ever supervised. Their names are Odette Fahey, Priscilla Tench, and Hollis Weeks. They greet me the exact same way every single night, in the exact same order, at the exact same spot, by the nurse's desk. I used to find that comforting. Consistency in a place like this feels like mercy. Last week, payroll asked me to sign off on the quarterly staffing audit, a formality I usually skim. But this time a line caught my eye. Odette, Priscilla, and Hollis had no direct deposit account on file. Not incorrect, not missing a digit, blank. That same afternoon I pulled their badge numbers to double-check the audit wasn't a clerical fluke. Ward 6 issues badges in sequence, one number after another. No exceptions in 3 years. Odette's, Priscilla's, and Hollis's were sequential too. But the sequence started at 0, a number security told me the system has never assigned to a living employee. I asked the tech to explain it. He said the software wouldn't let him reissue it, wouldn't even let him highlight the field. I called HR the next morning expecting a shrug and a data entry apology. Instead, the clerk went quiet for a moment and told me something stranger. All 3 of them were hired on the identical date, 11 years ago, to the day. 11 years, no gap in employment, no sick leave, no vacation request, ever. I mentioned it to Hollis in passing, lightly, the way you'd mention a funny form error. She just smiled and said, "We don't get sick anymore, doctor." Then she went back to charting like she hadn't said anything odd at all. I told myself people cope with illness in strange ways, that Hollis meant something ordinary by it. But standing near her at the desk that night, I noticed the air around her didn't carry the usual staff smell. No perfume, no antiseptic, nothing at all. When I leaned in to check a chart over her shoulder, the room went noticeably colder, the way a walk-in refrigerator does the second the door seals shut. I stepped back and blamed the vents. The ward itself is unnervingly calm. 0 restraint incidents in 11 years, 0 code grays, in a psychiatric unit that houses violent, unpredictable patients. That number should be impossible. I told myself it was excellent nursing. I told myself that for weeks. I decided to check their training files, hoping to find some special certification that explained the perfect record. The files existed, thin folders with a single continuing education card each, dated the same year, every course listed as completed with no instructor signature. I called the training office to ask who signed off on courses without an instructor. The woman on the phone laughed and told me nobody teaches those courses anymore. They were discontinued the year of the fire. I started paying closer attention on my rounds. None of the three ever sat down, not once in a 12-hour shift. No coffee breaks, no bathroom breaks, no lunch tray from the cafeteria cart that came up every night at midnight. I decided there had to be a shift I wasn't seeing. One night I stayed past my rotation to watch the change of shift that never happens. 6 a.m. came. Odette, Priscilla, and Hollis were still there, exactly where they'd been at 11 the night before. No one relieved them. There was no one to relieve. I checked the cart log the next morning, certain I'd missed a signature, some proof a relief nurse existed after all. The log showed 3 trays delivered to Ward 6 that night, each initialed in careful, identical handwriting. I compared it to Hollis's intake signature from the archive out of habit more than suspicion. The loops matched exactly, down to the same small hook on the letter H, a hook she still makes today. There's a bulletin board in the staff break room, curling at the corners, tacked with decades of memos. Behind a flyer for a retired blood drive, I found a laminated newspaper clipping from a ward fire decades back. The article insisted every patient was evacuated, 0 fatalities. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to frame and hang. I went down to records in the basement, the archive nobody has properly organized since the 70s. I pulled the personnel photos for Odette, Priscilla, and Hollis to check their original applications. Then I pulled the intake photos from that same fire year, out of pure, stupid curiosity. The folder smelled wrong before I even opened it, a faint char under the mildew, like something long extinguished that never quite finished burning. I told myself old paper picks up odors from basements, that it meant nothing. Then I noticed the edges of the intake photos were scalloped, warped the way photographs warp when they've been near heat, near flame. None of the personnel photos upstairs showed that damage, though the faces underneath were the same. The faces were identical, not resemblance. Identical, down to the same small scar above Hollis Week's eyebrow, the same crooked part in Odette's hair. 3 patients admitted that year. 3 names I did not recognize on the intake forms. 3 faces I recognized instantly from the nurse's desk upstairs. The fire report listed no survivors transferred, no discharge paperwork, no burial records anywhere in the county. Odette Fahey, Priscilla Tench, and Hollis Weeks did not walk out of that ward 11 years before I ever met them. They never left it at all. I spent that whole next shift convincing myself administrative rot explained it, that some clerk decades ago photocopied the wrong folder and nobody ever caught the error. But administrative rot doesn't explain matching scars, matching part lines, matching signatures separated by 11 years of daily use. I pulled the original 1980-something admission ledger to check the intake nurse's notes. In the margin, in handwriting I didn't recognize, someone had already written my name, dated for a day that hadn't happened yet. I told myself I needed sleep. I told myself paper records rot and misfile and get mixed up. But when I touched Hollis's hand handing off a chart 2 nights later, her skin was cold, the kind of cold that doesn't warm up under fluorescent light. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Careful, doctor." I decided to confront one of them alone, away from the desk, away from patient rooms. At 3 in the morning, I found Hollis Weeks by herself in the medication room, counting tablets under that single buzzing tube light, calm as ever. The medication room has one small window in the door, wire mesh through the glass, and for a moment before I knocked, I just watched her count. She counted the same 12 tablets 3 times, dropping each one back into the same slot, never moving on, as though the tray refilled itself every time she looked away. I knocked anyway. She looked up before the sound could have possibly reached her. I asked her, straight out, what happened to her in 1980-something, and why her employment file matched a dead patient's intake photo. She set down the pill tray. She didn't deny it. She looked almost relieved. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked with something close to gratitude. 11 years, doctor. You're the first person who ever noticed." She told me the fire killed more than the report admitted. Far more. And the ones who died kept caring for the ward because someone had to. Because the hospital could not survive an inspection into how many bodies that basement truly held. Every patient who dies quietly on Ward 6 since then gets folded into their tally instead of the county's. Kept off the record. Kept off the news. I asked her why the hospital simply hadn't emptied the basement floor, sealed the count once and for all, if the tally mattered that much. She said the county still expects a number every year, and someone has to be the one who keeps it honest, even a fictional one. Behind her, down the corridor, I heard the cafeteria cart being wheeled toward us, wheels squealing the exact same squeal I'd heard at midnight for 3 straight years. There was no one pushing it. Odette and Priscilla were in the doorway now, both perfectly still, both watching me with an expression closer to hope than menace. They said they were tired. 11 years of shifts with no relief, no replacement, no one to hand the tally to. I did not wait to hear the rest. I pushed past them, through the corridor, past the desk that had never once been empty in 11 years, and I did not stop until I reached the elevator in the cold outside air of the parking lot. I reported everything to hospital administration the next morning. By afternoon, the personnel files for Odette Fahey, Priscilla Tench, and Hollis Weeks had simply vanished from the system, as though the audit that started all this had never existed either. Out of some cold instinct, I requested my own personnel file to compare hire dates, just to reassure myself the software glitch was isolated to them. My file lists my hire date as 11 years ago, though I remember starting 3 years ago clear as anything. And beside my badge photo, in fresh ink that wasn't there last week, someone has already filled in a next of kin contact. I never gave anyone that name. Story 3. My name is Herb Talcott, and I have worked security at Dunmore Behavioral Health for 37 years, 6 days left before retirement. I know every hum this building makes, the elevator that groans on the 3rd floor, the vending machine that clicks twice before it drops your soda, the particular silence of the seclusion suite at the end of Corridor B. Nights here run the same. Badge scan at the security desk, keyring on my belt, thermos of Sanka going cold by 2 a.m. I walk the halls every 40 minutes, checking each room through the little wired glass windows, radio clipped to my shoulder squawking low. The quiet room is the one part of my route I never linger on. It is padded floor to ceiling, foam the color of oatmeal, and no matter what happens inside it, nothing gets out. Not a scream, not a footstep. You could drop a tray of silverware in there and hear nothing through the door but your own heartbeat. There's a logbook entry from 19 years back, before my time even started, that lists the quiet room's dimensions as 11 feet by 9. I measured it myself once, bored on a slow shift, out of nothing better to do. 10 feet 9 by 8 feet 4. Nobody ever corrected the log. I told myself the tape measure was off, or I'd misread the numbers, and went back to my rounds because that's what you do with things that don't add up on a night shift. 3 nights ago, I got home around 7 in the morning, same as always. Took my boots off, sat in my recliner, and turned on the radio for the farm report, except the radio was already saying something. My own voice. Unit 3, all clear, Corridor B, 4:15 a.m.
Low level.
I hadn't touched that radio in an hour. It was off. I checked the cord, unplugged from the wall, batteries loose in a drawer since Christmas. I stood there in my socks listening to myself say all clear over and over, like tape looping in a dead man's recorder. I figured it was tinnitus. My doctor mentioned it last year, ringing that mimic speech if you're tired enough. I told myself that, and I almost believed it, until it happened again the next morning in the shower, my voice bleeding through the water running, saying Corridor B, 4:15, all clear. I called my doctor about it anyway, described the way it followed me, kitchen to hallway, hallway to bedroom. He said stress does strange things to a man. 6 days from retirement, said maybe I was manufacturing company for the quiet coming. I wanted to believe that. I have believed worse things on less evidence. But stress doesn't loop the exact words I said at 4:15, doesn't get the inflection right, the little rasp at the end from 37 years of coffee and cold hallways. Tinnitus doesn't follow you room to room. It doesn't get quieter when you walk into the kitchen and louder again when you step back into the hall, like something pacing just behind your shoulder, deciding which room to sit in. By the 4th day, I noticed the pressure before I noticed the silence. My ears would go thick, like on an airplane descending, and then every sound in the house would just stop. The refrigerator hum, the clock. My own breathing sounded far away, underwater, exactly like standing outside the quiet room with the door shut. I tried opening a window during one of those spells, just to let outside noise back into the house. Traffic, a dog, anything. The window went up fine, hinges and all, but no sound came through the screen. I could see a truck rattling past on the road, see the branches thrashing in the wind, and I heard none of it, like watching television with the volume wheel snapped clean off. I mentioned it to Nella Vasco, the day shift nurse who's worked the ward almost as long as I have. She got quiet herself when I described it. The pressure, the way sound just left a room. She asked me if I remembered a patient named Amos Friel. I didn't, not at first. Then it came back. A catatonic man, admitted maybe 15 years ago, who spent 11 months in the quiet room without moving, without speaking, without so much as blinking on camera. Staff used to say the room got quieter after he left it, like it had learned something from him and kept the lesson. Nella also mentioned something the old logs got wrong about Friel. His intake paperwork listed him as 44 years old, but the admission photo, the one still clipped inside the folder, shows a man closer to 70, hair thin and white, hands curled like driftwood. Nobody at Dunmore ever flagged the discrepancy. Nobody wanted to be the one who opened that folder twice. Nella told me Friel was reported missing from a long-term care facility 2 counties over. Same week my radio started replaying itself at home. She said it like a joke, and neither of us laughed, because catatonic men don't walk out of locked wings on their own 2 feet. Here is the detail that recontextualized everything for me. When Dunmore's old maintenance logs were digitized, someone kept a note about the quiet room's soundproofing, that after Friel's stay, the sound level sensor in that room never fully recovered. It logged an unnatural silence, lower than the equipment's minimum threshold, for years, as if something had drained the air of its ability to carry sound. I looked up the sensor model myself, an old habit from filling out incident reports for 37 years. The manufacturer's spec sheet says the equipment simply cannot register a reading below its threshold. It isn't built to record an absence, only a presence. Yet the logs show a number anyway, printed clean on every maintenance sheet for over a decade, a measurement of something the machine was never designed to see. A silence that low isn't empty, it's occupied. And whatever occupied that room for 11 months has apparently decided it doesn't need Amos Friel's body anymore to keep existing. It just needs a quiet room, any quiet room. Mine, it turns out, was quiet enough. Last night I came home and the pressure was already waiting in the hallway before I opened the door, thick behind my ears like the building itself had followed me on the drive. I stepped inside and every sound in the house folded down at once. The porch lights buzzed, the wind, my own front door swinging shut. I stood in my own front hallway telling myself pipes settle, houses breathe, old wood ticks when the temperature drops after dark. None of that explains why my ears ached like a slow, depressurizing cabin, or why I could see the porch light still glowing through the window glass while hearing nothing of its buzz at all. I have worked nights in that building for 37 years, and I know the difference between a house being quiet and a house being silenced. I walked room to room the way I walk my rounds at Dunmore, checking corners out of 37 years of habit. Living room quiet, kitchen quieter. When I reached the hallway closet, the pressure in my ears peaked so hard I had to grab the door frame, and for 1 second I heard my own voice again, close, right against my shoulder, saying all clear. I did what I've done for 37 years when something needs containing. I found the quietest, smallest room in my house, the hall closet with the coats, and I shut the door on it, the way we shut the seclusion room, hoping a door is enough to hold something that isn't really made of matter at all. It worked for a while. The house had its noises back. The fridge, the clock, my own breathing loud in my chest. I sat in my recliner and told myself I'd call the ward in the morning, tell someone what I'd locked in my closet, let them figure out what to do with a silence that used to be a man. This morning I went looking for Amos Friel's old intake paperwork, the original file from 15 years ago, thinking I could find some record of where he'd gone, what he'd been before the quiet room got hold of him. On the second page, under emergency contact information, someone had listed a home address for future placement, filled out years before I ever bought my house. It was my address, not a nearby one, not a coincidence of numbers, mine, typed clean in a box meant for a discharge that never happened, dated the same year I put a down payment on that house, and hadn't told a single soul at work where I lived. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Marin from Vermont. She said she needed someone outside her own head to hear it because nobody in her life believes her anymore. And honestly, after tonight, she's not sure she believes herself either. I work nights at Corin General, 3 to 11, mostly triage, mostly quiet. For the last 6 months, after every shift, I'd drive 40 minutes north to Underhill State Hospital to sit with my brother Soren in the locked psychiatric ward. He'd had a bad break in the spring. He was the only stable thing left in our family, and then he wasn't, and somebody had to show up for him every single night. There's a guard at the front desk, Grady Pell, big guy, always doing a crossword. He'd buzz me through without looking up most nights, but about a month in, he stopped calling me Soren's sister. He started calling me Miss Callow, my last name, not my brother's visitor tag, my actual name, like he already had a file on me. I asked him about it once, joked that he'd finally learned to read a name tag instead of guessing. He just tapped his pencil against the same crossword clue he'd been stuck on for weeks, 17 across, 4 letters, forgetting. He never filled it in. He never seemed to try, like the puzzle wasn't really the point of holding the pencil. I figured he mixed me up with another regular. Night shift does strange things to people's memory, mine included, so I let it go. I always told myself it was exhaustion, the kind that makes you forget where you parked, not the kind that makes you forget who you are. The hallway lights buzzed the same low note every night, a sound I only noticed because it never changed pitch, not once in 6 months. Some nights the air smelled like antiseptic, other nights like the inside of our old house on the coast, salt and mildew. Though Underhill sits 2 hours inland from any water, I told myself hospitals just smell like whatever you carry into them. But my car never warmed up on those drives. 40 minutes on a Vermont back highway in November, and the dashboard gauge stayed on cold every single time, like the engine had just started, like I hadn't driven anywhere at all. I finally took the car to a mechanic in town, embarrassed, telling him the gauge must be broken. He ran it twice, said the thermostat read fine, said the block was warm to the touch both times, exactly like it should be after 40 minutes on the highway. He handed me the keys and said whatever I thought I'd seen, the car disagreed with me. The night attendant, a soft-spoken woman named Bess, used to greet me by the records desk with a paper cup of water and 2 little pills on a tray, and she'd say, "Take these before you go in, sweetheart," like it was routine. I always assumed they were for Soren. I never asked why she handed them to me first. One night I palmed the pills instead of swallowing them, just to see what would happen. Bess didn't blink, didn't ask, just refilled the little paper cup like she'd expected it, like there was always a second dose waiting underneath the first. Soren's space was down a corridor with reinforced doors, small wire glass windows, a cot bolted to the floor. He'd talk to me about our mother, about the house we grew up in on the coast, and I'd hold his hand through the little pass-through slot until visiting hours ended at 11:40. Every night, same script, same chair, same cold coffee going stale in my hand. He described our mother's kitchen down to the cracked yellow tile by the stove, a detail I hadn't thought of in years, and it comforted me right up until the night he mentioned the ocean view from a window that kitchen never had. I corrected him, gently, the way you correct someone half asleep. He just smiled at me like I was the one who'd gotten it wrong. 6 months of that, and I finally decided enough was enough. I filed for his discharge. I wanted the paperwork moved along, wanted to bring him home myself, sign whatever they needed signed. I told Dr. Vantry I was done watching my brother live behind glass. Dr. Vantry's hand paused over the file cabinet a half-second too long before she pulled the drawer, like she was deciding something rather than searching for it. She didn't ask which patient I meant. She only asked if I was ready, and something in the way she said it made the word feel much larger than the question. She looked at me for a long moment before she pulled the file. She said, "Of course, Marin. We've been expecting you to ask." She slid a folder across the desk, and I opened it right there, under the buzzing lights. The folder was thicker than it had any right to be for 6 months of nightly visits, thick enough that the weight of it in my hands made my stomach drop before I'd read a single page. The photo on the intake page was mine, my face, my hospital band, dated 6 months ago, the same week Soren was supposed to have been admitted. There was no separate chart for a Soren Callow anywhere in that system. There never had been. I flipped to the next page, hoping for a clerical error, anything ordinary. The intake nurse's signature was Bess's, dated that same week, and beneath it, in smaller print, a note that read, "Patient insists on nightly visiting hours. Accommodate as needed." I read it 3 times before I understood it wasn't about Soren at all. Dr. Vantry said it gently, the way you tell someone their pet had passed. She said I'd been admitted after a breakdown following our mother's death, that Soren had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on the coast highway, and that every night since, I'd driven myself here, signed myself in as a visitor, spent my allotted hour with an empty cot, and been sedated for sleep before Bess walked me back out to a car that had never left the lot. I asked her how that was even possible, how I could forget something like that every single morning. She said the mind protects what it can't survive losing twice. She said some nights I even wrote the visitor log myself, in my own hand, under my brother's name, because some part of me needed him to still be the one behind the glass instead of me. I stood in that hallway for a long time. I kept staring at the little wire glass window on my own supposed cell, half expecting Soren to wave from inside it, the way he always did at 11:30 sharp. Bess walked up behind me with the same paper cup, the same 2 pills, and said, "Take these before you go in, sweetheart." Exactly like every other night, like the conversation with Dr. Vantry hadn't happened at all, like it never does. When I asked what happens tomorrow, whether I'd remember any of this by morning, she checked her clipboard and told me the log already had tonight's visitor entry filled out in advance, dated for the next 4 nights, signed in my handwriting under the name Soren Callow. The contract came through New Mexico Game and Fish on a Tuesday, and by Friday, I was driving a rented Chevrolet pickup down Ranch Road 218 toward a town called Bitter Wells, with 3 trail cameras, 40 pounds of gear, and a name written on a sticky note, Ezra Whitlock. He was the only guide left willing to take a wildlife surveyor into Saltbrush Canyon, the dispatcher told me, and he came cheap. 3 Mexican gray wolves wearing GPS collars had gone dark in the canyon over 6 weeks, and Fish and Wildlife suspected poaching, not equipment failure. My job was simple on paper. Find the collars, document the kill sites if there were any, and get out before the weather turned. Ezra met me at a gas station with 2 mules and told me the same thing 3 times before we ever reached the trailhead. Stay on the marked trail, even to take a photograph, even if you see something worth photographing. He had tied strips of red cloth to junipers every 100 feet or so, and he checked each one with his fingers like a man counting rosary beads. That first night, he set his bedroll facing the canyon rim, then turned it around before dark, so his back was to the canyon and his face toward open, flat ground. When I asked why, he said the wind came off the rock at night, and he did not like the sound of it in his ears. I noted it and let it go, the way you let go of 100 small oddities before you understand which ones matter. My family has run cattle on the north side of that canyon for 4 generations, he said, and not one animal has crossed the fence line onto our land in the last 10 years. Not a coyote, not a deer, nothing. I assumed drought, overgrazing, something explainable, and wrote it in my notebook anyway because I trust facts more than feelings. We picked up the first dead collar signal near a dry wash Ezra called Cold Water Draw, mounted low on a juniper where no wolf could have hung it. Around the collar, the ground held a single line of tracks, evenly spaced. Walking in, that simply stopped. No scuff, no doubling back, no scavenger sign. Ezra looked at the tracks for a long time before he retied a ribbon 6 inches to the left of where it had been. That night, my handheld radio picked up a burst of static every time I pointed it northeast, toward a bearing with nothing on the topo map but blank canyon. He told me to stop pointing it that direction. I grew up 2 states overhearing skinwalker stories the way other kids heard about wendigos or chupacabras, campfire material for people explaining coyotes getting into the trash. I did not think Ezra was superstitious out of fear. I thought he was superstitious out of habit, and habits, I told myself, do not usually get people killed. On the 3rd day, we found a cached backpack half buried near a rockfall, tags from a survey outfit that had lost 2 contractors 18 months earlier, officially attributed to flash flooding. Scratched into the sandstone above it, faint but legible, were 4 names I did not recognize, and a 5th, half finished, started and abandoned mid-letter. That night I woke to find Ezra kneeling at the newest ribbon marker, laying a pinch of cornmeal and something dark and dried across the base of the juniper, murmuring words I could not place in English or Spanish or Navajo. Not mimicry, just genuinely unfamiliar, learned rather than inherited. When I asked what he was doing, he said only, "Keeps us right with the road," and would not look at me while he said it. I let it go again. I was very good that trip at letting things go. The trail camera staked near Cold Water Draw caught something on its 4th night. A shape walking upright on the flagged path wearing what looked like Ezra's canvas jacket. Its head turned fully backward over its shoulder, while its feet kept walking forward. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., an hour I could account for because I had been awake watching Ezra sleep 3 feet away. I did not tell him what the camera had recorded. I told myself I would ask a colleague about unusual predator gates once I reached reliable cell signal, a small, dishonest hope that there was a scientific name for what I had seen. There is no scientific name for what I had seen. On our 5th morning, while Ezra was down at the mules, I went into his truck cab for a spare battery and found, wedged under the passenger seat, a metal ammunition box that did not rattle like ammunition. Inside were wallets, a woman's turquoise ring, 3 driver's licenses from 3 different states, and a spiral notebook filled with dates going back 11 years. The notebook was not a client log. It was a ledger, tally marks beside names, and beside the earliest ones, a single word written over and over in the margin, paid. I counted 41 names before Ezra's shadow fell across the open truck door, and I looked up to find him standing there. Not angry, just tired, like a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to finally open that box. "You were never going to find those wolves," he said, quiet, almost gentle. "The canyon does not take collars. It takes what walks it. 10 years ago it wanted my sister, and I gave it a stranger instead, and it took the trade, and it has taken a trade every year since. Because that is how the arrangement works once you make it. You do not get to stop. You only get to choose who." I asked him why he was telling me this now, in daylight, instead of simply walking me out to the ribbons like the others. He said the ones before me never opened the box. He said I was the first one who might actually understand what he was choosing, and that knowing did not change what came next, not for either of us. That night he led me east, off the flagged line, past the last ribbon on the last juniper, toward the bearing my radio had been screaming about since the 2nd day. He said the deal only worked if the guide walked the guest to the threshold himself. It could not simply be a name in a ledger, it had to be a hand on the shoulder. What came to the edge of the firelight was shaped like a coyote, the way a puppet is shaped like a man, joints bending in the wrong direction at the wrong speed, watching us with an attention that had nothing animal in it at all. Ezra's hand tightened on my shoulder, and for the first time in 6 days, his voice shook. He said one more name into the dark, and it was not mine. He said his own, clearly, twice, the way you would repeat an address to someone hard of hearing. And then he stepped past me onto the unmarked ground alone, and told me to run for the ribbons, and not look back no matter what I heard behind me. I ran the flagged line in the dark with my headlamp dying and something moving parallel to me through the brush, matching my pace exactly, breathing wrong, and I did not stop until the ribbons ended at the trailhead, where the trucks were parked and the sky was starting to go gray at the edges. Search and rescue found the mules 2 days later, unharmed, still tied where we had left them. They never found Ezra. The official report eventually called it exposure, a man lost to unfamiliar terrain in bad weather, and closed the file the way these files apparently get closed out there, if you know which office to ask. Within a week, all 3 of my dead wolf collars came back online, transmitting from 3 separate locations inside Saltbrush Canyon, all of them well inside the flag trail, all of them fine. Fish and Wildlife called it a minor miracle of battery chemistry. I did not correct them. I went back to New Mexico's Western District and finished the season's other surveys, and told almost no one what actually happened in that canyon, because there is no field report format for it, no box to check. But I kept Ezra's old ledger, and some nights I still read the names in it, 41 of them, and I think about how none of them, as far as I could find, were ever reported missing by anyone who loved them. Then, this spring, a renewal contract for next season's survey work arrived at my apartment from the same regional office, standard paperwork, except for the cover letter clipped to the front, handwritten instead of typed, addressed to me by a name only Ezra had ever called me out there. I turned the envelope over to check the postmark twice before I believed it. 11 years old, faded but legible, mailed from Bitter Wells the same autumn his sister first went missing. Which means somebody wrote my name down and sealed it away a full decade before I ever answered his advertisement for a guide. Story 2. My name is Harlan Bousquet, and for 31 years I have been the only coroner Caldera had, out here where the highway forgets to curve for 40 miles at a stretch. I embalmed my first body the same month I embalmed my father. You get used to the smell, the formaldehyde and cold metal, until it starts to smell like Tuesdays. I had 11 months left before retirement when a rancher named Wyatt Cobb came through my door on a gurney with a torn throat and eyes that would not stay shut. The intake photos from the sheriff's scene showed a wound 6 inches long, ragged, animal-made, coyote maybe, or something bigger that had learned to walk the arroyos at night. By the time I got him onto my table, the wound had closed to a thin pink line, like a scab a week old instead of 6 hours. I told myself the deputy's camera flash had washed it out. I wrote it down anyway, in the margin, where I write things I don't want to explain to anyone. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Nadia Prine, noticed it too. She held the flashlight to Cobb's eyes out of habit, the way you check a living patient, and the pupils contracted. Both of us stood there a long moment not saying anything useful. She laughed it off. Nerve tissue does strange things, she said. Dead men fart, dead men twitch, why not a lazy pupil? I have seen 4,000 bodies in this county, give or take, and I know what a dead man's face is supposed to do. It is supposed to do nothing at all. Wyatt Cobb's face, lying under my fluorescent lights, kept doing something like listening. His wife had called him missing 3 days before a rancher's dog found him half buried near a dry wash off Highway 62. Sheriff Ostrander told me the coyotes must have dragged him a mile before giving up on him. I remember thinking, coyotes don't usually give up on anything that's already dead. I remember thinking it, and then filing the thought away, the way you file away a smell you can't place. I embalmed him on a Thursday. Standard procedure: drain, flush, replace. His blood came out thinner than it should have, almost clear, and it smelled less like copper and more like wet fur, the smell a dog gets after rain. I opened a window even though it was 38 degrees outside. Nadia asked if I was feeling all right. I told her exhaustion does things to a man's nose after 3 decades of this work. That night I dreamed nothing, because I don't dream, but I woke at 3 with the certainty that I had left a cooler door unlatched. I hadn't. I checked twice. The second time, Cobb's drawer, his tray, the steel one on the second row, was warm to the touch along one edge, like a dashboard left in the sun. I want to be careful here, because I've read the old stories the same as anyone raised near this land. The ones the older Navajo families don't like to say out loud after dark, about something that wears a dead man's shape to walk in among the living, skinwalker stories. I never believed the word belonged anywhere near a coroner's ledger. I believed in tissue and bacteria, and the slow, honest chemistry of decay. That belief lasted exactly until the Friday I pulled Cobb's dental film to match his intake chart. The molars didn't match. Not close, not a filing error. The man on my table had 2 more teeth than the man in the 2011 X-ray on file, and no trace of the childhood scar Cobb's own mother described to Ostrander over the phone, the one from a barbed wire fence when he was 9. I called it a records mix-up 3 separate times before I stopped believing my own excuse. I drove out past the wash where they'd found him, alone, at dusk, because a man doesn't retire in good conscience without checking his own work. The ground near the culvert was disturbed in a wide loop, drag marks running the wrong direction, away from the road toward the mesa, not toward it. Coyotes drag things toward cover. These marks went toward open ground, like something had walked out under its own power and only later decided to fall down convincingly. I told myself the real Wyatt Cobb was still out there somewhere, hurt, wandering, and that the man in my cooler was some confused drifter the sheriff had misidentified in the dark. It was a comforting lie, the kind you build out of spare parts because the alternative doesn't fit inside a normal Tuesday. I went home. I locked my own door for the first time in 19 years. 2 nights later, I went back in near midnight because Nadia's car was still in the lot and she wasn't answering her phone. The front bell hadn't rung. The security light over the loading bay had been unscrewed, not broken. Unscrewed carefully and set down on the step like someone had wanted quiet more than damage. The embalming room lights were on. Cobb's tray was open and empty. The plastic sheeting pooled on the floor like shed skin. Nadia's flashlight lay near the drain, still lit, rolling very slightly, as though something had just set it down and walked away from it on quiet feet. I heard him before I saw him. Wyatt Cobb's voice, easy and familiar, coming from the hallway behind the cooler bank, saying my name the way he always had at the feed store on Saturdays. Harlan. Just Harlan. Nothing more. Like we were about to talk about rain. Except Wyatt Cobb had been embalmed 9 days prior, and I had personally sewn his mouth shut. He stepped into the light wearing the wrong face. Not Cobb's, not exactly. It sat on him like a mask 2 sizes off. The mouth stretched slightly too wide. One eye set a fraction higher than the other, as if it had been assembled in a hurry from memory, rather than measured from a mirror. It was, I understood later, wearing pieces of a face it did not fully own, the way I'd stitch a torn seam with whatever thread was on hand. It asked me, very gently, whether the paperwork was finished, whether the county had signed off yet on Wyatt Cobb. I understood then what it wanted, not to kill me, not first. It wanted its story closed, filed, buried under 6 feet of official ground, so no one would ever go looking for the real man again. I told it the paperwork wasn't finished, that the dental records didn't match, that I'd already driven out to the wash. It tilted its borrowed head at an angle a human neck doesn't allow, considering me the way you'd consider a bill you hadn't expected. Nadia's flashlight kept rolling, slower now, the beam sweeping once across a second set of tracks on the floor. Bare, too long in the toe, pressed in something dark that wasn't tile grout. I have handled 4,000 bodies and never once run from a room. I ran from that one, out the loading bay, past the unscrewed light, into a parking lot lit only by one dying bulb in a sky full of nothing. I did not look back to see whether it followed. I have chosen, since then, not to know. They found Wyatt Cobb's actual remains 11 days later, 17 miles east near a wind farm access road, exactly where nobody official had thought to search, because the man they'd already buried under his name was resting comfortably in the town cemetery with a headstone and a widow who brought flowers on Sundays. Dental records matched this time. Everyone signed off. I retired the following spring, 4 months early, and told the county I had nothing left to give the job. Nadia never turned up. Officially, she's a missing persons file 2 towns over. One nobody links to mine because nothing ties us together on paper except a payroll ledger nobody reads anymore. I keep her flashlight in a drawer at home. Some nights it clicks on by itself. Low battery, they tell me. Just a loose switch. Nothing more than that. I sleep better than I should, all things considered, in a house 11 miles from the funeral home I no longer own. Last month, a man came to my door selling insurance, wearing a smile that sat on him like it had been borrowed for the occasion, and called me Harlan before I'd told him my name. Story 3. The GPS on my dash quit working around mile marker 58, same as always, and I didn't think much of it. Highway 491 does that this far north of Anthem Flats. The tower coverage just gives up on you. I'd run this stretch for 6 years hauling freight for Alkali Freight Company, and I knew every dead patch of signal like my own teeth. It was just past 11, no headlights behind or ahead of me for 40 miles, and I liked it that way, quiet. Yolanda at dispatch grew up near here, and she used to joke about this stretch on the CB. She'd say guys who drove 491 at night told skinwalker stories just to keep themselves awake. Said something out there takes the shape of somebody you trust and walks right up to your truck like it belongs there. I used to laugh along with her. 2 years on this route, and the only thing I'd seen past Cinder Butte was a dead elk and a highway patrol truck asleep at the pump. Around mile 40, there's an old gas station, boarded up since before I started driving, and some of the old-timers out here still leave little bundles of ash tied above their door frames, out past town where the porch lights are few and far between. I never asked why, I just noticed it, the way you notice things you don't plan to think about again until you have to. So when my headlights caught a shape on the shoulder near mile 62, a girl, alone, no car pulled off anywhere, no lights behind her as far as I could see. I felt that old joke crawl up the back of my neck before I even slowed down. She had her arms wrapped around herself like the cold mattered. It was October, and the desert drops fast after dark. Cold enough my breath fogged the glass when I cracked the window. She looked maybe 16, in a thin flannel and no shoes, and that should have stopped me right there. Bare feet on that asphalt would have been raw meat inside a mile, but hers looked clean, pink, like she'd just stepped out of a shower. I told myself she must have lost her shoes climbing out of whatever car had dropped her. I told myself a lot of things that night that turned out to be wrong. She said her name was Wren, said she'd been trying to reach her mother in Gallup since a ride dropped her outside Sundown Wash hours ago. Her voice cracked on the word mother like she hadn't said it out loud in a while. I gave her the blanket I keep behind the seat, cranked the heat, and told her she could ride as far as I was headed. She thanked me twice, then went quiet, staring at the windshield like she was counting mile markers. When the dome light clicked off, I caught her reflection in the black passenger glass for just a second before my eyes adjusted back to the dark. It didn't move when she did. I told myself it was the angle, the glare off my own dash, nothing worth mentioning. She asked what I was hauling. I told her reclaimed lumber, 41,000 pounds of it, and she nodded like the number meant something to her. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the smell. Juniper smoke, thick and green, the kind that clings to your clothes after a bonfire. Except there wasn't a fire for 100 miles, and the desert out there doesn't grow juniper this far south of the mesa. I rolled my window down an inch to clear it, and the smell just got stronger, like it was coming off her flannel instead of outside air. She didn't react to the cold at all. Around Around mile marker 111, my CB crackled to life on its own, channel 19, and underneath the static, I heard something that sounded almost like breathing. I keyed the mic and asked if anyone copied. Nothing came back but that same slow breathing, patient, unbothered, like whoever it was could wait as long as it needed to. Then it said a name. Ren, clear as anything, calling out like she'd wandered off and needed to come back. I looked at the girl beside me. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned her head toward the radio at all. I asked if she heard that. She said quietly that the desert does that sometimes. Carry sounds strange. I wanted to believe her more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. I clocked something loping along the ridge to the north, keeping pace with the truck at 71 miles an hour, which is not a thing anything on four legs is built to do for long. It kept to the tree line, ducking behind junipers and boulders like it knew exactly how much of itself to show me. Every time I told myself it was a coyote, it got a little too tall, a little too upright, and I stopped telling myself that. I tried dispatch. Yolanda usually answers within 30 seconds, day or night, and that night I got 11 minutes of static and my own voice bouncing back at me half a second late, like the desert was chewing my words before spitting them out. Somewhere in that static I heard the breathing again. It sounded closer than mile marker 111 had any right to sound. Then the voice on the radio said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. It said, "Please, I'm trying to get to my mother in Gallup." Word for word, syllable for syllable, in Ren's exact voice, from somewhere out behind the trailer, where nothing should have been walking, let alone talking. I looked at the girl next to me. She was smiling at the windshield, and it did not reach anywhere close to her eyes. I asked her, straight out, "Who's out there, Ren?" She turned to me slow, like her neck worked on a different hinge than mine, and said, "Nobody," in a voice gone flat and wrong at the edges, like a recording played half a step off pitch. I asked her mother's name again, the one she'd told me at mile 62. She hesitated, just a half second too long. Then she said, "Tamsin, correct, perfect," and smiled at me like she'd passed a test I hadn't meant to give. That hesitation is what did it. I thought back hard to before I'd ever seen her on that shoulder, and I remembered a sound I'd written off 20 miles earlier, back near Sundown Wash. A slow, heavy thump from inside my own trailer. Like cargo shifting on a curve there wasn't one. I'd checked my mirrors, seen nothing wrong, kept driving. That thump had started before I ever picked up a hitchhiker at all. I looked at her under the dash lights, really looked, and saw the skin along her jaw didn't sit flush against the bone the way skin is supposed to, like a coat one size too loose at the collar. Her pupils didn't narrow when I flicked on the cab light. Somewhere behind us on 491, the real Ren Talsey was locked inside 41,000 pounds of reclaimed lumber, and I had been talking to something else for 80-some miles. I didn't say anything else to her. I watched the exit sign for Cinder Butte come up in my headlights, 4 miles, then 2, and felt the truck rock once, hard, like something heavy had jumped onto the running board on the passenger side. The mirror showed nothing there. The thing next to me hadn't moved an inch, still smiling at the windshield, still wearing Ren's face, like it had borrowed it and never planned to give it back. I pulled into the lot under the sodium lights and threw the truck into park harder than I meant to. The second the overhead lights hit her through the windshield, she flinched. Actually flinched, the first honest reaction I'd gotten all night. And I used it. I hit every interior light full blast and shoved the passenger door open from my side. She went out through it like the light itself was pushing her, gone into the dark past the pumps before I got my seatbelt off. I ran to the back of the trailer with my flashlight shaking so bad the beam looked like it was underwater. I heard it before I got the latch open. A thin, ragged banging from inside. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The rhythm of somebody who still had enough hope left to be patient. I got the latch up and the door swung wide, and there she was, the real one. Wrists zip-tied to a support strut. Flannel torn, barefoot, eyes wrecked with crying, but alive. She told told me later, wrapped in a blanket in the back of a deputy's cruiser, that she remembered a woman at a gas station outside Sundown Wash offering her a ride, remembered climbing into a different truck entirely, and then nothing until my flashlight found her. She never saw who put her in my trailer. She didn't need to. I already knew, and I told the deputies I'd walk that tree line all night if they wanted, but I already knew we wouldn't find anything. The deputies searched the tree line anyway, and found nothing but coyote tracks that stopped clean in the middle of open ground, like whatever made them had simply stopped needing feet. Real Wren rode the rest of the way to Gallup in the front of a squad car, while I followed behind with the trailer doors chained shut for the first time in 6 years of driving this route. Tams and Talsey met us at the sheriff's station at 4 a.m. and didn't let go of her daughter for a long time. I still drive Highway 491. Alkali Freight never asked why I stopped picking up riders, and I never told them. Yolanda still jokes about skinwalker stories on the CB sometimes, out of old habit, not knowing how close she's cutting it, and I let her because some things are easier to leave as jokes for people who haven't met them. 3 weeks later, Tamsin called, just to thank me again, she said, and to let Wren say hello. The girl's voice came on the line, warm, grateful, saying my name the exact way she had in the truck that night. Please, I'm trying to get home. And for one full second before she laughed and said she was only teasing, I could not tell which girl I was listening to. Story 4. This one is yours. This one was sent to us by Tessa from Arizona. She said she has typed this email 4 times and deleted it 3, so please forgive her if it does not read smooth. She just needs someone else to know before her daughter turns 7. I grew up on my grandmother's sheep ranch outside Chinle, out past the wash where the mesa goes orange at 5 in the evening. My grandmother Nasha ran 40 head of sheep and 1 dog named Pepper, and she taught me songs before she taught me my letters. There was a song for herding, a song for rain, and a song she only ever sang at dusk, low, almost under her breath, facing the wash. She called it the calming song. She told me it was for the visitor. She had rules that made no sense to a kid. Never hum after the last bell of the day. Never answer if you hear your name called twice from outside, only if it is called 3 times. And even then, answer with the song, not your voice. I thought it was superstition, the kind every rural family has. Salt on the windowsill, don't whistle at night, that sort of thing. Pepper wouldn't cross the wash after dark no matter what we threw for her, and Grandma Nasha never once made her. When I got older, I tried the rational things everybody tries. Coyotes, cougar, a neighbor's loose dog. Except cougars don't herd sheep into a perfect circle and leave without a single bite mark. And coyotes don't leave the wool clean, folded almost, like someone had taken the time. That happened twice in my childhood. Both times, Grandma Nasha sang the calming song for 3 nights straight afterward, standing at the edge of the wash with her back to the house, and both times, whatever it was, it left us alone for years. She got sick when I was 22. Near the end, she told me something I wrote down that same night, because I was afraid I'd convince myself I imagined it. She said the visitor was never hunting us. She said she bound it to our family, generations back, so it would never take from outside. She said the deal was simple, and it was hers to keep paying. In exchange for our safety, it got to circle 1 child from our line every generation. Not to hurt, just to watch. To learn the child's name, its walk, its silences. She said it was patient work, and it never rushed. She said I was that child once. The year I turned 7, she stopped letting me sleep near the window, stopped letting me hum, started singing the calming song every night instead of some nights. I remember that year. I remember thinking she was just tired. After that year, it moved on, she said, and she thought that meant it was done with our family for a while. She thought she had bought us more time than she had. She died 3 weeks after she told me this, and I did not think about it again for a long time. I have a daughter now, Alma. She turned 6 in April. 2 months ago, she started humming a tune at dusk that I never taught her, low, almost under her breath, facing the wash behind our new place outside Many Farms. Last week, our dog wouldn't cross the yard after dark. Last night, I heard my name called twice from outside the fence line, and I did not answer because some part of me remembered the rule before I remembered why I remembered it. Tonight, I checked on Alma, and her window was cracked, the one I always keep latched. She was sitting up, humming that same tune, facing the glass, and she said without turning around, "It knows my name already, Mama. You said it 3 times when you were little." I sat with her until sunrise, singing the only song I remembered whole, and it worked. It went quiet, and I told myself that was the end of it, the way my grandmother must have told herself the same thing 30 years ago. But I keep thinking about how it called my name only twice when I was 7. Grandma Nasha always said 3 calls meant it was ready to take its turn. 2 calls just meant it was still deciding whose turn it would be. Last night, outside my daughter's window, I counted. It called her name 3 times. You have been listening to Hear the Horror, true stories, rebuilt in full sound. If you carry a story of your own, send it in. The next one could be yours. New episodes every Thursday and Sunday. Sleep well, if you can.